Hey, what's up, everyone? Morey here, and today we're going to be talking about how to more effectively build speed and getting a little bit more in depth into the stride length as well as the leg turnover. So, when I think about stride length, and the best way to be able to connect with it to me is like those Godzilla movies where you see just a giant, Godzilla, but you could think about any type of big monster, alien, or something, or even Power Rangers was another thing I thought of where they're just taking these really long steps and are covering a lot of ground, but they're really slow, but still are covering ground. So there's a part of speed that goes into that stride length that I think is important, right? Because you'll see, like Godzilla, for instance, you see him taking these big steps, and you have people that are running, they're taking way faster steps, right? They're moving way quicker, but they're not really moving fast in comparison to Godzilla, who's taking these big, lumbering, slow steps, is covering the same or sometimes more ground. And we've seen this too, where it's like some of those athletes, especially when you're younger, playing on the playground, you see like those kids that have that super fast turnover, but they're really not fast. They could be quick, they could run fast for maybe 5-7 steps, but really lose that top end speed. And so really trying to create a little bit better understanding of what is it that is going to be the right combination of that stride length, opening up the stride, with being able to still maintain that quickness or that fast leg turnover, is where I want to be able to add a little bit more clarity into what it is that you could do to improve your speed. And really, to me, it comes down to the force into the ground. I know this is a big thing that we've been talking about a lot lately, but at the end of the day, if you are an athlete that is struggling with being able to cover the distance necessary per step, or looking to understand how to get more stride length, it comes a lot down to how much force are you generating into the ground. Because when you see, we'll use this athlete as an example here on the left, we can see he ends up not really generating very much force because of, the push off here. So he's quick, right? He's taking quick steps, but he's not covering any distance. And a lot of that has to do with how much force we're generating. If stride length is something that you want to be able to understand how to improve, a lot of it has to do with just creating more effective force into the ground. It doesn't necessarily need to be more force in the ground. Some people are, like what we just saw in this last video here, some people are generating the amount of force necessary, but really it is how they're generating the force that ends up being the most important thing. So instead of the force going straight down into the ground, in order to cover more distance, what you have to be thinking of is being able to pull the foot back. And I think this ends up being a great transition to another important topic, which is where on the foot do we want to be landing? Because I know that we'll see some athletes that are running on their toes and will not be able to pick up very much distance because they're running so much on their toes. That ends up going back into the whole force thing. And the thing is, with that type of an athlete, somebody who's landing a little bit more just on their toes, I would say that you want to be able to really connect with them, that they want to be covering more length, more distance. Okay. So sometimes the issue is athletes are trying to cover too much distance per step, especially at the start. And this gets into that overstriding concept. And when you see that, now we're going to see somebody that's typically landing more flat-footed, more on the heels. And this is going to be an overstrider. So this is an example of like overstriding, landing on the heels, not landing on the toes there. So that is somebody that, while, he's not covering a lot of distance, he is theoretically overstriding because he's landing with the foot too far out in front of him. But with somebody like this, what the concentration is let's make it so we're able to more effectively land on the front part of the foot while maintaining the reach. So I'll get more in depth into where you want to be landing in your fourth step or in your seventh step, where people that are struggling with landing too much on the toes, going too quickly, I could use that example as well to help them in opening up. But a lot of times I'll end up really having them work on, like I'll use like a band or resistance, the Raptor, to really make it so they could feel how to generate more force into the ground and make it so it's further back behind. Because a lot of times with those people, they're just not generating any force in the ground, which makes it so they're able to run so quick. And that's the difference between, going back to that like Godzilla analogy, right? So it makes him be able to pick up so much distance is obviously the long legs. But what happens as he's walking is he's covering so much ground because of how much force he ends up generating in the ground. So it takes him a long time to be able to get from one step to the next, right? Or again, like Transformers, anything like that, where people, right, a human, their legs moving a lot faster, but they're not able to generate nearly as much force. So while the leg speed is there, the distance isn't there. And even if you try to really open up your leg stride and increase your distance, then immediately what you feel is just a lot longer foot contact. So you want to be able to, when it comes to building speed, understand how can we be quick with our foot contact while also maintaining the length necessary to be able to pick up a lot of distance per step. And finding that balance, I think it ends up being different for everybody, but it has to do with being able to be effective with the force production. So we don't want to have the force production start to drop off as we are increasing the length. We still want to be able to generate large amounts of force and be able to generate that force with the foot back underneath you. And you could feel that force production start to drop off or start to diminish if you are, one, landing too much on the toes, right, getting too quick, or if you are overstriding, right, reaching too far out, where now we're landing with the foot out in front of our hip and the force in front of the hip, and as opposed to being able to land with the foot or with the balance of the foot being a little bit more underneath us or having a little bit better control. I know I made a video about overstriding and how there's a lot of benefits there, and that's just because the foot could be landing slightly out in front of the hips and it still be able to be in a controlled enough position where essentially we can land on the toes and we can stabilize and still push off and still be able to pick up a lot of speed. And that's the difference between, going back to that like Godzilla analogy, right? So what makes him be able to pick up so much distance is obviously the long legs, but what happens as he's walking is he's covering so much ground because of how much force he ends up generating in the ground. So it takes him a long time to be able to get from one step to the next, right? Or again, like Transformers, anything like that, where people, right, a human, their legs moving a lot faster, but they're not able to generate nearly as much force. So while the leg speed is there, the distance isn't there. And even if you try to really open up your leg stride and increase your distance, then immediately what you feel is just a lot longer foot contact. So you want to be able to, when it comes to building speed, understand how can we be quick with our foot contact while also maintaining the length necessary to be able to pick up a lot of distance per step. And finding that balance, I think it ends up being different for everybody, but it has to do with being able to be effective with the force production. So we don't want to have the force production start to drop off as we are increasing the length. We still want to be able to generate large amounts of force and be able to generate that force with the foot back underneath you. And you could feel that force production start to drop off or start to diminish if you are, one, landing too much on the toes, right, getting too quick, or if you are overstriding, right, reaching too far out, where now we're landing with the foot out in front of our hip. I know I made a video about overstriding and how there's a lot of benefits there, and that's just because the foot could be landing slightly out in front of the hips and it still be able to be in a controlled enough position where essentially we can land on the toes and we can stabilize and still push off and still be able to pick up a lot of speed. So a big part of this that ends up being, I think, important is being able to connect the length of the stride, right? And being able to really open up the stride and being able to have that range of motion while also being able to maintain the leg speed. We've seen a lot of people talk about how most athletes have the same turnover of their legs, but there ends up being primarily difference of the force or the foot contact time that is a big separator. This is what a lot of like the top sprint coaches are talking about now. And I do think that there is some degree of truth to that, especially the higher level sprinters. They have a very, very similar turnover speed, but when it comes to especially the end of the race, some of these guys that are really fast just have a better foot contact time. They're better with being able to get their foot off the ground. And so what we want to understand with the stride length and being able to be better with effective stride length is how can we maintain the leg speed, which is a lot of times how are we striking the ground. So as soon as our foot strikes the ground, this is going to be kind of that closing part of this, right? So we talked a lot about how the foot's striking the ground. I know I move fast and I would love to be able to, I try to slow this down. I try to make it so it's a little bit more easy to grasp and understand, but I am excited. I'm passionate. I love talking about sprinting. So it excites me to be able to help you guys and be able to run fast. And similar to when I'm running, I'm trying to get my legs to move fast. I'm trying to get my body to move fast. I'm trying to get everything to move fast. My brain is moving fast, right? That's why sprinting is my sport. I can't do slow, long. These are just things that don't connect with me, right? I'm thinking fast. I'm thinking explosive. I'm thinking power. Those are the things that I want to be able to really showcase, right? I'm trying to get my body to express it. And so it comes out in how I'm talking as well, or the speed at and the rate that I talk at. So to just wrap this up, we talked a lot about stride length already. Okay, we talked about how to increase the stride, how to strike the ground, where we want to be striking the ground, some of the issues or some of the errors that we'll see in striking the ground, right? We talked about how we want to be landing more towards the toes, or if we're landing too much on the toes, it's going to impact the amount of force that we're generating in the ground. Therefore, we're not going to be able to cover the right amount of distance. If we're landing too much with the heels or too much out in front of us, then we might have a too long of a stride, and therefore we'll need to kind of quicken that down to make it so we're able to land a little bit more on the toes, have a little bit more effective leg position or body position when it comes to your stride. Because you want to be looking at this stuff and saying, okay, where am I on this spectrum, right? Is my stride length good? This is always something, if you're passionate about running faster, if you're passionate about speed, then it's something that you want to be able to consistently take note of in terms of how well am I able to get down the track or get down the field or whatever the case may be. So if you're trying to go 40 yards, you want to be aware of how many steps does it take me to go 40 yards. You're trying to get better at your 40. If you're trying to get better at your 100, how many steps does it take me to get to my 100? Or if you're trying to get a faster 10-meter fly or 20-meter fly, then how many steps does it take me to get my 20-meter fly? Because that could be a part of why you're not running fast. So first, you want to get an idea of stride length. This is a key to help you in being able to run faster. Building speed, right? This is the topic that we're talking about. The other thing is going to be that leg speed, the turnover. So maybe you have the right amount of distance per step, which would be about 4 to 5 steps for most people in 10 meters. It's going to be about 20 steps for most people in 40 yards. It's going to be about 44 to 45 steps, depending on what your goal is for the 100-meter. If you're not able to get to that distance, you're taking 5 steps to go 10 meters, then you really want to understand, okay, how can I cut that amount of distance down? Now, once you start to get that distance down, now you want to start to be aware of, what is my leg speed? What is my foot contact time? How can I make it so my legs are moving faster? So a part of that is going to be the force production. How much force are we generating on the ground, and how are we generating that force in the ground? But most importantly is, how are we pushing off of the ground? How are we absorbing the force and then being able to translate that off the ground in a way that's going to be effective for our leg speed? And this is a great example of what that should look like in terms of how the foot is pushing off the ground, right? I know this is still when he's in his drive phase, but it's still something that we want to be able to see. How is his foot pushing off the ground to make it so then he is translating the force forward and not upward? What ends up happening for a lot of people, especially if they have longer turnover speed or are not generating great force in the ground, is the foot is coming too high behind in comparison to the amount of forward translation that is being created. And there has to be more of a priority put on this forward action out of the leg to make it so then you can count on yourself to be able to be consistently building speed. If your foot gets here, now the force production starts to stagnate, which makes it so then you're not going to be able to run fast. Once your force starts to stagnate, right, it's supposed to be building. So as you're going, you should be building force production into the ground by being controlled with your foot strike. Once you get to this position, which is going to happen, you're going to get to a point where you're not able to generate any more force in the ground. You kind of maximize that out. Then that's when you start to hit your top speed. What we want to be able to do is, in a way, delay that as long as we can, because that just means that the force is continuing to go up and up and up. The longer our force is going higher, then we're going to be able to continue to run fast. We're going to continue to build speed. But if we end up plateauing early, right, if our foot's coming up behind us too much, if our leg speed isn't able to match our stride length, then what's going to happen is we're going to plateau earlier with the force production into the ground, which is going to make it so then our cap of our speed is going to be a lot lower. And so in order to prevent that, we have to be aware of how the foot is both absorbing and pushing off. So as we're pushing off the ground, we want to be pushing ourselves forward or horizontally and trying to refrain from pushing ourselves upwards or pushing our leg upwards and landing straight downwards. Because the sooner that happens, then that's when you're going to be at kind of that max force position, where the longer you could stay more horizontal with the force, right? So we're landing with our foot going like this, our weight going like this, which means they're going to rebound with our momentum going that way. The longer we could stay in that, then the faster you're going to be. And so we want to be able to, again, combine that with the stride length. So if we lose the ability to get distance, right? Because you could stay doing this all day and pushing off like this for a while, but and end up starting to limit the stride length, right? You could do that for maybe, let's say, 60 meters. You could stay in this position and be able to pull back and push forward for 60 meters. The issue is you're going to get to a time period where now the stride length for that 60 meters is going to be way below average because you're not in an upright position. And so you have to get to a point where you are maximizing that stride length. You're continuing to cover the right amount of distance while also maintaining that leg speed to make it so then you can adequately create force in the ground or effectively create force in the ground and build your speed. Again, this is what we're talking about here, is how to build your speed. And I know there's a lot of concepts in there. I know there's a lot of information in there, but if you're somebody that is even watching this video about building speed, you're already, I think, in a position where you're trying to effectively understand those higher level concepts. And so the higher level you go, the more specific you need to be when it comes to your force production and how you're using your feet, how you're landing, how you're balancing, how you're controlling. And I would say a good amount of time should be spent in being able to just work on the mental side of this, right? So if you're trying to understand your foot strike, your push off, your stride length, you got to do a little bit of some research, a little bit of some numbers into what is it that you are feeling and what is it that you are actually achieving. And I would say that's important on both sides. You don't want to be blind to what it is that you're doing on your right and your left. And it is not going to just be instinctual. It's not going to just be natural. Sometimes I'll see this on like Reddit or on different platforms, even my YouTube comments sometimes, where people are like, oh yeah, it's just natural. It's not something I really think about or really feel. And that is a way to do it. And maybe for some people that works, just focusing on doing and getting stronger, just creating more strength or just being as relaxed as possible. That doesn't work for me. And I wouldn't recommend it for somebody, because I think the more you control, the more that you have awareness of, then the more you can actually influence and impact. So I like to feel the difference between what I'm doing on my left and my right, and when my foot's striking the ground and how well I'm able to do that. And the only way to be able to really connect with it, I think, is to write it down, is to really say, okay, on my left side, I'm landing like this, or on my right side, I'm landing, I feel how I'm landing, and also watching it and being able to compare and contrast. How is it that you feel you're creating force in the ground, or what does it feel like when you are creating force in the ground? These are important questions to ask yourself. And then based off of what you feel and how it connects to you, how does it actually look on film? What does it look like when you are actually trying to do those things? Because if those two things are different, if you feel like you're landing on the inside part of your foot, but you're actually landing on the outside part of the foot, or if you feel like you're landing with your foot underneath the hip, but instead you're actually landing with the foot inside of the hip, looking from the back, or in front of the hip, looking from the side, then that tells you something about your actual mind-body connection. And therefore, you can try it again and see if you can make an adjustment, see if it feels the same, see if it feels different, and then make, again, an adjustment, make a change. If you're not, I saw this the other day, or I heard this the other day, and I think it was so great. If what you are not changing, you're choosing. I think that that's such a great thing to be able to easily connect to, right? If what you're not changing, you're choosing. So if you choose to stay the same, right? If you choose to run the same speed, then you won't look at these types of things. If you are actually interested in making changes and making adjustments, then you have to change and you have to be able to adapt. And it's the consistent progression of adaptation is what makes it so you're successful. It's the repetitiveness of the little things, it's the perfection of the little things, right? Being able to be successful or be able to just run and be an Olympic champion is not one day you show up and you're able to achieve it, or else Noah Lyle wouldn't work so hard, or Noah Lyles wouldn't work so hard, or Fred Curley, or Kashane Thompson, or let's see, none of these people would work as hard as they do with sprinting if it was just you just can show up and just do it, right? Genetically, right? People won't always say, oh yeah, they have the genetics. Maybe they have some of the genetics. That could be true. I can't tell you for sure, but I do know this: they are training way too hard to rely just on their genetics. And so what ends up making somebody great, what ends up being the separator, is not one time showing up and being able to perform. It's the perfection of the little things, the perfection of the drills, the perfection of the foot contact, the perfection of the start, the perfection of the drive phase, the perfection of the top end speed, the being able to look at each small individual part and be able to influence that and be able to change it and be able to make it so that makes a difference in their performance, and being able to do that day after day after day after day after day, not seeing results, not seeing improvements. That's even what I do with this YouTube channel, right? I go day after day after day after day, and I'm thinking about how can I make this better? How can I do this better? What can I work on to do and achieve this at a higher level? And it's day after day after day after day. I was just looking, I've made over 1,000 sprint mechanics videos. I couldn't believe it. I'm looking through and looking back and seeing if I can recreate some of the videos to make it so they're better. 1,000, over 1,000. And so that ends up being, to me, it was motivating. It was partly demotivating. It's probably embarrassing, right? I'm like, damn, I made so many videos. So many of these have 100 views or 300 views or 400 views. That could be so much better. But it was also motivating where it's like, man, when I get to 2,000, right? Like my videos are going to be so good. After it took me 1,000 to get and be able to connect and be able to understand this, but wait till you get to 2,000. 2,000, there's going to be like, oh, wow, this guy really improved. This guy really got better. This guy really made some changes. This guy's really concentrated on his craft of how he makes the videos and how he's able to connect and how that information gets transmitted to a different person. And it should be the same for you. You should be able to make that same type of improvement. If I was to see you work on your sprinting today, or within the past week, or within the past month, and then see you in a month or 2 months or 3 months, and I should be able to see improvement in that amount of time. We should be able to see you progress over 3 months. Or if you haven't progressed, if you hadn't made improvements, then that's an issue. How long should you work to be able to achieve your goals? I love the analogy where it's like talking about babies. How long should a baby work until they walk? How many tries should they take until they take their first step, right? The concentration is on until, right? Keep on trying until you're going to be successful, right? Until you get the response, right? Babies don't just stop after, you tried 15 times, tried 50 times, tried 100 times. You can't just say, oh, you're just walking's not for you, baby. Sorry. We're going to just move on. You're going to have to live this life without being able to walk. No, you keep on trying, keep on trying, keep on trying. Get the courage, the baby, keep on coming, keep on trying, take another step, keep working until you walk, until you balance, until you could take the first step. Same type of thing with sprinting. Keep on working until you make the progress. It doesn't always come right away, but you should keep on trying. If you need any help, if you need anything to be able to get you over those humps when it comes to your mechanics, I have different offers for you. Those are all down below. As always, thanks for watching. Hopefully this helps. And as always, we will talk to you soon.